There's an article on IGN that was written a while back, around the time that The Force Awakens came out, that I really liked. It basically highlights the question that many EU fans keep asking in regards to Star Wars. Why shouldn't the expanded universe be continued as an alternate storyline? There are a few reasons why I think this article is so great. It's well written, it summarizes my thoughts on the whole situation better than I ever could. It's on a mainstream website like IGN, so not only are more people exposed to it, but the idea that other people that aren't directly connected with the EU movement have similar feelings about the discontinuation is very encouraging. So this article is titled, Between the Panels, It's Time to Bring Back the Star Wars Expanded Universe. Amen. This article is written by Jesse Steen, which I know I'm mispronouncing, and I apologize. A link to this article will be in the description. Jesse writes, There are very few downsides to the idea of Disney breathing new life into the Star Wars franchise. But one of them is the fact that the old expanded universe has been jettisoned in favor of a new, streamlined, Disney-approved Star Wars continuity. All the old novels and comics and video games have been swept away, leaving only a handful of new books and Marvel projects standing alongside the films and TV series. I won't argue that Disney and Lucasfilm were wrong to want a clean slate on which to build their Star Wars universe. However, there's no reason the expanded universe can't still live on in a more limited capacity. There's plenty of room for the new Star Wars continuity and the expanded universe to coexist. I agree 100%. I don't have any issues with Disney wanting to make their own Star Wars storyline. My issue is like Jesse said, why can't the EU live on in a limited capacity? I don't even care if Disney gives their new storyline priority. Heck, even if they released one Legends novel for every 10 or 20 new canon novels. That would be awesome, and everyone would be happy with that. To Disney and Lucasfilm's credit, it's not as if they're pretending the expanded universe doesn't exist. The older novels and comics are still in print and available for purchase. They're just now adorned with a Legends banner to denote that these stories are no longer considered to be in continuity. And aside from the fact that they aren't continuing, again, I agree with Jesse. Disney, Lucasfilm, Del Rey, and Marvel are doing a great job with reprinting EU material. Some of the older books can get these awesome new covers, and there's a timeline in the front of some of the books saying where it takes place. And the Marvel Epic collections are a good way to collect large portions of the expanded universe comics. It's convenient for new fans who are just getting into the EU. As for the Legends banner, it's probably not the best way to honor the expanded universe, but it opens a giant opportunity to continue them as a separate storyline, because we now have delineated between what is part of the new Disney canon and what is part of Legends. The expanded universe is simply too rich and still too full of potential to simply cast aside. Worse, there are EU stories that may be forever left hanging. Take the Force Unleashed games, for example. The Force Unleashed 2 essentially ended on a cliffhanger, one that would have eventually been resolved if the behind-the-scenes turmoil and the slow implosion of LucasArts as a developer hadn't doomed the franchise to a premature death. A third game may never happen, but why not at least continue the storyline in the form of a novel? Again, I agree with Jesse. The EU is enormous already, but I think that's part of the appeal. It's vast, but the stories are continued naturally, and the potential for more stories is unending. I made a video on this topic already about what stories they could still build off on, or what plot threads need to be finished. I even used The Force Unleashed 2 as one of the examples of this. If you want to watch it, I'll put a link in the description for that one too. But really, I was just scratching the surface of the story ideas. There is way too much potential in the EU for it to just end. On a more fundamental level, the EU deserves to continue because it can be home for stories that can't be told in the new Star Wars universe. Disney clearly has a very ambitious and intricate roadmap for the Star Wars franchise in the years and decades ahead. The problem is that the tie-in projects are now much more limited in what they can do. The movies, and to a lesser extent the TV series, are going to shape and define this new Star Wars universe. The comics and novels are charged with filling in gaps, bridging the movies, and telling more confined stories. I'd argue this is one reason why the overall quality of the novels has declined in the last couple of years. There simply isn't the same level of storytelling freedom there used to be with the EU. When it came to projects like Heir to the Empire and Knights of the Old Republic, creators had wide open canvases on which to paint. Timothy Zahn almost single-handedly defined the post-Return of the Jedi landscape with his early books. We're not going to see any new novels or comics that have that same level of impact on the franchise. While the EU was thrown out to give more creative freedom to filmmakers who want to take the storyline in a different direction, Jesse is right in that there's actually more creative freedom for storytellers if they continued making content for the expanded universe, especially now that they don't have to fuss over dealing with the continuity overlords at Disney who have their own vision about how Star Wars should be. If the Lucasfilm Story Group had their own division who maintained the Legends universe, kind of like how they do with the Old Republic MMO anyway, then we can have the original timeline continue without dealing with a tsunami of the new canons, tie-in TV shows, cartoons, comics, novels, and annual movies. It wouldn't be produced as quickly as it was before the reboot, and it wouldn't be officially canon, but it would keep the storyline alive, and it would go a long way in rebuilding the relationship between hardcore EU fans and Lucasfilm. And who knows, with those wide open canvases for the storytellers, we might still be able to get another Legends story which is on par with the quality of the Thrawn trilogy or Knights of the Old Republic. The only real argument against bringing the EU back into play is that Star Wars fans might be confused by the existence of multiple Star Wars universes. But is that really such a problem? As reboot-happy as Hollywood has become, even the most casual of moviegoers are growing accustomed to the idea of multiple universes and multiple continuities. 2009's Star Trek may have rebooted the series, but there are still new Star Trek stories being told in the classic universe. No one's head exploded when James Bond suddenly morphed from Sean Connery into Roger Moore. If Marvel and DC can have entire multiverses full of alternate versions of their characters, why can't there be more than one Star Wars universe? Why not more than two, for that matter? As long as things like the Legends banner are employed to make it clear what's official and what's an alternate universe story, it shouldn't really be an issue. I think it's a weak argument when people say the EU shouldn't be continued because it would confuse people. For one thing, if you go into a bookstore, new canon and Legends books are sold side by side on shelves. So, if Disney's goal was to not confuse people with two separate Star Wars universes, they already failed when they created the new canon. And I've already mentioned the ways that keep Disney's canon and the Legends universe both separate from each other and consistent with their own respective storyline. Number one, like Jesse said, you have the Legends banner, which clearly says this book is part of the Legends universe. Number two, you have a timeline in front of both new canon and Legends books, which say where it takes place in the story and what other books are a part of that overarching timeline. And number three, it's more subtle, and I don't know why this is, but new canon books are actually slightly taller than EU books, whether they have the Legends banner on it or not. So even if you're in a bookstore and there's an EU book that doesn't have the Legends banner on it, or it doesn't have the timeline in front of the book, you could still put it next to, say, the Force Awakens novel. And if it's shorter, in most cases, barring a few weird exceptions like the Clone Wars Gambit novels, it's an EU book that you got there. So taking all this into account, in terms of alternate universes, Star Wars is actually far less confusing than Star Trek, Doctor Who, James Bond, Marvel, DC, or any other franchise that has multiple canons. Also, the taller new canon books are more expensive than the Legends novels. So, for what it's worth, Legends books are a better deal to boot. Jesse finishes by saying, I'm a firm believer that story matters more than continuity. As a decades-long Star Wars fanatic, all I really want is the best possible Star Wars stories in every medium. Disney isn't going to get the best possible stories by insisting that every new Star Wars comic, novel, and game fit into the complex web they're busy weaving. There has to be room for creators who just want to play in this toy box without worrying about what condition the toys will be when they're finished. I mostly agree with that, though I think a little regulation with new expanded universe novels would benefit the story too. They can be more creative without going completely nuts. We still want those toys in that toy box to be recognizable after all. Even the old EU back in the day was restricted by the parameters placed by people in charge of continuity. But Jesse is right about wanting the best possible stories in all mediums. I want that too. New canon and old. After reading what all Jesse had to say, this has only made me wonder even more. Why shouldn't the expanded universe be continued as an alternate storyline? This truly is a great article, so by all means, share it around as much as possible.